It's wonderful to be back. Good evening to those of you in India and good morning to those of you who are here on the East Coast. I'm delighted to be doing this interview again with a wonderful professor who has agreed to talk about some very interesting work and a book that I'm sure you will all find very, very interesting. Edward Hess is an interesting fellow. As Dan pointed out, today is his birthday, and I will just point out that we're the same age, so it's quite good. I feel I'm working with someone that I understand where he's coming from, I hope. So Ed began his career at Warburg Paribas Becker on the Wall Street, much as I did. I worked for Thompson McKinnon. So, but then also like Ed, we got into the academic game, and I think that's very, very important. 20 years ago, Ed joined Emory University in Atlanta and began his research as the founder of the Center for Environmental and Corporate Growth, Entrepreneurship and Corporate Growth, excuse me. He also was the starter of the Value-Based Leadership Institute. So leadership is obviously the topic that the Leaders Excellence is most interested in. The leadership aspect of Ed's book is critical in that it looks at three different parts of the leadership personality. It's the cognitive, it's the behavioral, and finally the emotional aspects. And so Ed will talk about that. But going back to his quick bio, in 2007, he moved to the Darden School at the University of Virginia, and that's where he is now teaching MBA and Exec Ed programs. He has a history of working with international organizations like IESE in Barcelona and the Indian Institute of Management. So he has a wonderful background that will be interesting to all of you who are participating. So today we're going to talk to Ed about his newest book, Hyperlearning, or How to Adapt at the Speed of Change. I think what I read and what I understand from the book is that he's looking at how we as humans will remain a part of the important part of industry, but how we have to change, how some of our old ways of working are going to need to be looked at. It's a big future that we have. We're going to have some very interesting facts about how people are perceiving their work and how artificial intelligence is becoming more and more important. So we've got a big task ahead of us. Let me ask a first question. So Ed, what made you write this book? What was it that led you to think about these topics?
Well, Bill, I've been in this specializing in the learning space really now over a decade. And, you know, as we all know, technology is going to basically transform how we live, how we work, and who works. And it became clear to me that I felt there needed to be a book out there that was a how-to book. How can we human beings add value in the digital age that the technology can't add? And what does that look like? And that looks like primarily for people on this talk is being able to think differently than the technology, and all about emotionally connecting with other human beings in the pursuit, all right, of business, of happiness, of meaning, etc. And there were lots of books that have a lot of concepts. There's a lot of great books out there on psychology, on learning. But what I felt was missing was a book that basically operationalized concepts and scientific findings behaviorally. And so the real focus, the book is really almost more like a workbook. There's reflection times, there's workshops with deliverables. It's based on active learning theories of how best to learn, but how do you operationalize concepts behaviorally? So it's a behavioral based book. What behaviors do we need to be better at? Do we need to do more? What behaviors get in the way of us being able to add value in the digital age? And that led to the bringing of philosophy into the book. The book is built upon philosophy and science, because philosophy is, many you know, and many people here on the podcast know, that, you know, much of human development, from a philosophical viewpoint, goes back 2,500 to 3,000 years. So what I've done is brought Eastern and Western philosophy together, merged it with current science, especially the science in neuroscience and the science in psychology, and said, what's the new story? What's the digital age story for human beings? How can we go out there and add value? How can we have meaningful work? How can we have a meaningful life? And the answer is that the answer is by constant adaptation, by constant learning, unlearning, and relearning, because technology is going to basically continue to produce knowledge at faster and faster paces. And so there is no way we will know more knowledge than technology. So therefore, what value can we add? How do we add that value? And that is through interaction with other human beings. And that's where the emotional stuff comes in, and that's where the behavioral stuff comes. So,
yes. Yeah. Let me just interrupt for a moment. You talk about mastery of self as one of the concepts that you use. When you're looking at how we learn, how does mastery of self make us better learners?
well, let's look at this, what the science of learning says about ourselves first. Let's focus on the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Science is very, very clear. We're all suboptimal learners. We are wired, all right? We are wired to be speedy, efficient thinkers, all right? We're wired to be on autopilot. We go out in the world and we seek confirmation of what we believe. As we're behaving today and going out in the world, we are only processing 0.1% of the stimuli that's coming into our body. We have been built to be efficient machines, fast, speedy, efficient machines. We only go out in the world and see what we believe. It's very rare that we can go out in the world and see things which are not already ingrained in our mind. This is all recent neuroscience, the last 20 years. So we're very speedy and efficient. We go out seeking confirmation what we believe. We also go out seeking affirmation of our egos. In many ways, we have defined ourselves and we get our ego strokes, all right, by being smart, all right? Most of us grew up in a time where being smart was evidenced by the grades we got in school. Who were the smart people? The people that got the highest grades. Everybody listening today qualifies, all right? Everybody got good grades. Everybody, that gave you the ability to go on and progress throughout your life. That feeling of smartness limits our ability to learn because we're heavily invested in what we know. And as I say in the book, going forward, we have to excel at not knowing and figuring things out. And so we're speedy, efficient thinkers. We're confirmation seekers. We seek affirmation of our egos. And we're emotionally defensive. The 3 Ds: defend, deny, deflect, when we are basically, our views are challenged. And if, you know, there's even more. There's one more big one. Yeah. When we go out in the world, we seek cohesiveness of our stories of how our world works. And no matter how smart you are, every one of us are wired that way. So we have to overcome that. And that's the self-work where I talk about inner peace. And that is the working on self to have a quiet ego, quiet mind, calm body, and to go into the world with a positive emotional state. That's where the ancient philosophies come into, with practices on how to quiet one's ego, how to quiet one's mind, how to be fully present, fully present. And the result is what I call inner peace. And I define inner peace as a state of inner stillness and calmness that enables you to embrace the world with your most non-judgmental, fearless, open mind with a lack of self-absorption. And you get to inner peace by basically daily practices. All right, and the book lays out that daily intentions. How do I want to behave and be this today? And daily practices. And organizations that I've worked with that have been on this journey put in place daily practices, such as before every team meeting, there's a check-in. All right, and there's either a breathing exercise or a meditation exercise. At the end of every meeting, there's a checkout. And that's basically all of it designed to impact the emotional side. And
So Ed, those of us that, let me just interrupt for a moment, but those of us that did our MBA at Harvard or Darden, we don't find this that comes naturally. This is not something that comes naturally.
No, it doesn't come naturally because we've created our story and we've been successful doing things in a specific way. But the difference now is that, you know, going forward, my biggest competition, I'll just role play, Bill, my biggest competition, if we were working together, knowing you and everything, how smart you are, I'd lose. But my biggest competition would be you, all right?
Right.
Going forward in this world, my biggest competition is me. I've got to basically bring my best self to work with an open mind, being willing to explore. The digital age, the key is going to be how-to skills, how to manage what's going on inside of yourself, how to bring your best self to work, how to really listen. All right. I was talking with one of the leading executive recruiters in the United States yesterday. We were talking about what's going to be the real strategic differentiator going forward in organizations. And he asked me that question. And I answer, the quality of the conversations that are going on in the organization. The quality of conversations. Because the speed of change and the need to adapt, organizations are going to have to be highly adaptive, just like we're going to be highly adaptive. And to have those types of conversations, is certain types of behaviors and mindset has to be at the table. You got to bring your best non-defensive, non-self-absorbed, open-minded, willing to explore. Your ego's not invested in what you know. Your ego's invested in the quality of your thinking, the quality of your listening, the quality of your relating, and the quality of your collaborating. So it's a whole new story of how I define myself, and then takes the ancient Eastern and Western philosophies and the common principles of how do I basically change my approach to the world.
So
does that make sense?
That makes sense, and I'm going to ask people who are on this event to ask any questions they might have in the chat, and we'll pass those on to Ed. But my question is, do you see technologies such as we're doing now with Zoom helping these things, or are they making them more difficult? Do they fit into your model?
Yeah, Zooms will fit into the model. And that's been one of the surprising things. If you know, there's very few, almost no positive things about the pandemic, but that's one of the positive, maybe the only positive thing, except the vaccines, that's come out of the pandemic. Many organizations have come to the conclusion that, wow, we can connect and relate virtually. Now, they've had to change how they do that, and they've had to face the fact that they've had to invest in, quote, the emotional side. Learning is cognitive, behavioral, and emotional. And the emotional, in many cases, is at least equal to the other two, and in some cases, more important. And when I first went in the business world, my first job, I can remember the first day, my boss taking me into his office, closing the door, and he's told me to sit down, and he says, "You see that door?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Leave your emotions at that door. Emotions have no place in the workplace." I said, "Whoa, okay. I got you. I hear you." He says, "Can you do that?" I said, I was young, so 23 years old. Yes, I can do that. I had no idea what he was talking about. What we found through the pandemic is that emotions are in the workplace, and we need to basically acknowledge them and deal with them and accept them and help people. And that all came because of Zoom. That all came because of the pandemic and Zoom. So because of Zoom or online work, organizations have had to basically invest time in the emotional side. How's everybody doing? All right. Have to check in with people emotionally. Have to have more types of time spent in the meeting talking about how things are going with family at home. All right. So the answer is the emotional state. I really think when we get down to it, I don't know whether it's 10 years from now or 15 years from now, but at some point in that near future, the main differentiator between us humans and the technology is going to be our emotional capabilities. It's pretty clear. Ray Kurzweil at Google has been talking for years about the fact that we will, 2030s, technology will be able to do every cognitive task, no matter what it is, better than human beings. He was on the forefront of that. He's pretty credible. His predictions over the last 30, 40 years on technology have a 90% success rate. But what's fascinating is one of the leading cognitive scientists in the world, just this past July, was doing a podcast, okay? And I'm talking about Daniel Kahneman. And Daniel Kahneman said he has come to the conclusion that by 2030, there will be no cognitive tasks that technology will not be able to do better than human beings. So what does that leave for us human beings where we're going to add value, all right? And human beings are going to add value in situations where technology can't add value. And what does that mean? In the going into the unknown and exploring, creative, imaginative work, moral decisions, human engagement with other human beings. And yes, technology is going to get emotional. Yes, little AFs, artificial friends, are being produced now and are being prototyped now that, my grandchildren can have a little artificial robot friend that's highly emotional, talking about feelings. But in the workplace, feelings, and where do feelings come into play? Feelings come into play primarily or heavily in collaboration. All right. Well, what role will collaboration play in the digital age? Collaboration basically enables collective intelligence. All right. No individual is going to be, quote, smart enough to figure out what we need to do because of all of our biases and all of our limitations. Most work's going to be done in small teams. The small teams that are going to basically excel are the teams that optimize collective intelligence, and that's the intelligence of the team. And that's a special way of being in teams, and that's heavily, heavily emotionally laden. It's interesting. The best work on collective intelligence has been done by MIT and Carnegie Mellon, the best science. MIT was the leader and basically created a whole bunch of research. Fundamentally, teams were formed, diverse teams, diverse backgrounds, diverse training, all right? Because remember, we see what we believe, we seek affirmation. So I need people who know things that I don't know. I need people trained differently than I've been trained. I need people who have had life experiences different than people. But you get these teams of 5 people together, and they were given either problem solving challenges or creativity type of challenges. And they're looking at collective intelligence, the intelligence of the group versus IQ. How effective were the teams? 5 team members. The findings were, quote, earth-shattering, end quote, especially to anybody of the male persuasion. The best collaborators in solving complex problems and the best collaborators in being creative or innovative were teams made up of 5 women and no men. The second was 4 women and 1 man. The third was 3 women and 2 men. And you understand how it goes. Well, they didn't believe the research. They basically ran that study 5 different times and came to the same results. Carnegie Mellon said, "You're crazy." They basically ran the study 3 times and came to the same results. Now, what's the difference? Men generally approach collaboration as a competition, as a transaction. Now, there are great men collaborators and there are poor women collaborators. It's not all or nothing. But women tend to approach collaboration as a relationship-oriented thing, not a transactional thing. And what's fascinating is that can men become better collaborators? Absolutely. Absolutely. If you work on the self, if you quiet the ego, if you be more open-minded, if you're leading the collaboration, you're more democratic. Make sure everybody speaks up. Harness the power and the energy. You chose people to be on that team for specific purposes. They had abilities which you respected, and et cetera, et cetera. Bring people out. And so the whole game, really and truly, emotions are going to be ultimately the key differentiator in organizational success. And positive emotions enable learning, and negative emotions deter learning. It's funny, when I first got deep into this, must be 5 years ago, I was in Seattle. The university asked me to go out and do a talk with alumni, and a lot of the alumni were very senior people from Microsoft and Amazon. And we were having this conversation about collective intelligence. And a woman raised her hand in the audience. There was about 120 people there in the audience. Said, "Professor S, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Of course." She said, "I'm assuming that the science is all correct." I says, "Well, it's pretty consistent. Yes, it's best we got at this point." She says, "Well, if you're telling me 5 women, are better collaborators than 5 men, or 4 women, teams with 4 men," she asked me, that us women, we can basically buy sperm from geniuses and have our own babies. I said, "Yeah, I understand that's possible. I don't know it, but I understand it." She says, "Well, in that case, going forward in the digital age, why do we need men at all if we're the best collaborators?" And and I looked around and I saw the men. There were more men there than women. And I saw faces getting red. Okay, I saw earlobes starting to get red. And remember, these were all alumni of my business school, all right? All were donors of my business school. So I sat back, and how do you think I answered her? Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Anybody out there?
Anybody? Probably not, since it's so controversial. I said, "What do you think?" I didn't answer it. I said, "What do you think?" I tossed it back to her. She says, "I've really thought about this a lot, and I can't figure out an answer that's positive." And, and thankfully that was like one of the last questions. So I'd lost the men by then. Now, why am I telling that story? I'm telling that story because we all need to deal with our reality going forward. All right. And our reality is men have certain types of biases and have been raised in our society to be strong and powerful and to know, all right? To know, to have the answers. Well, going into digital age, the people that are going to be the smartest people who excel at unknowing and going out and figuring new things out. That's what it's going to be all about.
So 20 years ago, when I was working at the Center for Creative Leadership, we used the Myers-Briggs. And what I'm hearing you say now is that we ESTJs are a species that is about to go away.
Well,
I don't know.
we are. I think that we have to transform ourselves and take more ownership of what goes on inside of us, our mind, our ego, our emotions that are ultimately operationalized by our behaviors. And it comes down to success, learning, hyperlearning from a human viewpoint has two big buckets. Inner peace, how I come to the table, am I bringing my best self, in otherness, my abilities to relate and emotionally engage in positive ways with other human beings. That leads to the highest levels of conversations in organizations. So our model of survival of the fittest, it's all about competition in organizations, will be history. Or the organizations that continue that will either be organizations that are in industries where you need very few humans, all right, where it's, take the extraction industries. You're going out and basically drilling mines. Be very few humans are needed, okay? Or they will be industries that go extinct or organizations that become extinct. That's the challenge. The human challenge is basically transforming HR departments into HD departments. Mm-hmm. Instead of human resources departments into human development departments. Every business is going to be in the human development business in addition to its core business. That's what you're seeing. If you want real time, look at the changes the new CEO or the recent new CEO of Microsoft has made in vis-a-vis emotions and what we're talking about in Microsoft compared to what existed under the founders' generation. And look at what's happened to Microsoft's productivity and earnings in the last years. All right.
So it really sounds like we're moving from leadership in the traditional sense to a shared leadership or self-managing teams. What is how does leadership fit into your model?
Leadership is very, very important. And I say that leaders are going to be enablers. They are the enablers of this transformation, and they have to behaviorally transform themselves. But leaders, the Industrial Revolution model of business will exist and will be automated. The model that going forward into this new digital age, because of the pace of change, because of the pace of knowledge creation, the best people are saying that the shelf life of new knowledge going forward will be 2 to 3 years. So we're talking about constant adaptation, learning, unlearning, and relearning at the speed of change, which is the byline to the Hyperlearning book. In order to do that, leaders have to create the environment, role model the behaviors that enable people to think at their highest levels and to relate at their highest levels, to listen at their highest levels, and how to effectively be optimized team performance, collective intelligence, because the end game of collective intelligence is collective flow. Everybody on this program, I'm sure, knows what flow is. You get in the zone, you're all in, you're in the, time flies. The best collaborative teams are teams that can consistently get in a state of collective flow. And I've been in those situations in the last 4 years with organizations, with teams that have collective flow. They are magical. They are magical what comes out. And what's interesting is the time, and most of these are major big issues in big companies where, for example, we had a day set out to solve these issues or discuss these problems. These are teams that have been on the journey that I'm talking about, the journey to best self and bringing the best self to table, the journey of otherness, of being able to relate and connect in positive ways with other people. They've been on this journey, so they've been training themselves. We never had a day-long meeting last longer than 3 hours because this team was able to get into a state of collective flow within 15 minutes of starting the meeting. And that means everybody was totally silent inside, open-minded, trying to understand. They were engaging in what I call trying to understand what the other person meant and also seeking to be understood in a mutually beneficial way. It's magical. It is magical, and it works. I've been there, I've seen it. It works.
The first 15 minutes, let's talk about that. How do you get a group to agree within 15 minutes to be open, to obey this set of rules, which we'll say is not a set of rules?
Sure. Well, the specific one I'm talking about is a company that I'd been working with for really 6 years on the behaviors, on the personal development. And they put in place practices, daily practices in their organization that they start every meeting the same way with a check-in. Where is everybody? Where's your head? Where's your heart? How are you feeling today? And then they do either a 3-minute meditation or a 2 to 3 minute deep breathing exercise. And then they go around the room and in effect, once again, get out on the table. What would people like to discuss, and put it all up there. So they have a meeting agenda that includes practices to give people time to come from the last meeting and calm down. Be still. Be at peace. Is everybody in a good place? Okay, where do we begin? And so people say, that'll take too much time. We don't have the time. The entire practice is a 7 to 8 minute practice. All right. The ROI far exceeds the loss of 8 minutes of work.
It would be interesting to go back 6 years, and who was the leader in that organization that saw the value of this technique, or not necessarily the person himself or herself, but how did you convince that person?
The CEO.
Was the CEO. Mm-hmm.
The CEO. I mean, all the work I've done with this basically doesn't get done unless the CEO is bought in, is going to role model, and is going to play by the same rules, the same game. And with his direct reports, when he's having meetings with his direct reports, they do the same processes that a manager does with their innovation team, for example. And so it's scaled throughout the company. It takes time to get to this point, all right? It takes time. It takes time scaling it through an organization. But after, it can take in many cases a year to a year and a half to scale it in an organization, to start it. Do you see immediate results like I'm talking about? No. Do you see results, progress? Yes. Will you see a transformation in 3 to 4 years? Yes. If you stick with it.
Once again, I'm going to point out that if you go to the bottom of your screen at the reactions button, you can raise your hand if anyone has a question. I think we're really getting into the nitty gritty, if you like, of what Professor Hess is trying to teach us today. But I'm sure you have some questions out there. In the meantime, I just want to go back to the point of the quality of conversations. In these meetings, who monitors the quality of the conversation?
Well, there's another part which we haven't discussed.
Mhm.
And basically, I have organizations create your rules of engagement. How will everybody agree to behave in team collaborations? All right. So you've got your rules of engagement. And so the rules of engagement, and you grade yourself, and they have to be observable behaviors, how we're going to behave. And it goes back to and brings together, if you will, what I call the hyperlearning behaviors. All right. Organizations embrace, I have organizations choose 6 or 7 behaviors out of the list which they feel they need to work on, that people need to work on, improve. And examples of the hyperlearning behaviors are curiosity, open-mindedness, humility, being fully present, mindfulness, courage, resilience, challenging the status quo, on and on. So, and listening. Listening is mission critical. And so they know, and they've been working on this stuff, so when they come, everybody sort of knows. And in the one company I'm using an example, they have those rules of engagement in every conference room, in every office around the world in their global company. In every conference room, there's the rules of how we want to be when we come together and talk.
Mhm.
And in the beginning, you review the rules. Now, what I haven't talked about is the behavioral change plan of individuals. Individuals have to be doing their personal work on working on 1 or 2 behaviors they're trying to improve. People, we generally are reflexive and defensive listeners. Our mind is basically thinking when other people are talking at least 50% of the time. All right. We either are thinking about our response, we're thinking about the next meeting, the last meeting, what I'm going to be doing. And we generally are creating our response instead of fully listening. Reflective listening is one of the key, I guess every company I work with has chosen to work on reflective listening. Truly listening with an open mind is the bedrock, all right, of starting to have good conversations. And learning that when a person stops talking, you don't immediately respond to the person. You ask questions to basically make sure you understand what they meant. Bill, this is what I heard. Is that what you meant? All right. Bill, I'm having trouble on this thing. I don't know what you mean when you use this word. What do you mean by that? Okay. Or let me I did the paraphrase one. You paraphrase back, but you show people that you're trying to listen before you respond. Before you go in the old way of being, before you went for the jugular. All right. Before you go back and show people how smart you are. One thing we haven't talked about is the concept of new smart. All right. Everybody on this program today is smart. You've been successful. All right. And how did you first learn you were smart? What was the evidence that you were smart? Well, I bet it was very early on in grade school when you got the highest grade in the class. And most of us got to where we are historically by getting the best grades in the class. Well, think about it. In the digital age, we were basically smart because we knew more than the competition. Does anybody listening really think that you're going to know more knowledge than a smart machine? I'll just use Mr. Watson, IBM's Mr. Watson. Do you think you're going to know more knowledge? Mr. Watson, and I'll take the medical field because I know a little bit about the work they're doing there. Basically, every 1 to 2 weeks, they take all of the new research published in the world and download it into Mr. Watson, Dr. Watson. There's no doctor that's, one, got the time to do that, two, that's that up to date. So we all are out there with this definition of smart. I got to look smart. That's how I'm going to get promoted. That's how I'm going to get the best raise. That's how I'm going to get choices of people. That's how I'm going to get the best teams. And my model has the concept of new smart. I'm defined not by what I know or how much I know, but by the quality of my thinking, listening, relating, and collaborating. My mental models are not reality. They're only my stories about how my world works. I'm not my ideas. My ego's not going to be invested in my ideas. I've got to decouple my beliefs, not my values or my ideas, from my ego. So I don't immediately defend, so I can be more open-minded. I must be open-minded and treat my beliefs as hypothesis. Everything I believe is a hypothesis to be constantly tested and subject to modification by better data. My mistakes and failures are opportunities to learn, so long as I don't make the same mistake and the same failure over and over again, because that says I'm not learning. And so if we get down to it, it's these how-to skills, which many of us have not been trained on, that are going to be the how-to skills that help us evolve to be able to think differently than the technology, to be able to emotionally connect in ways that generate, all right, the highest level of team collaboration, and ultimately to go into the unknown and explore and discover, to be innovative, to be creative. And so we got to remake ourselves.
You certainly make it difficult for an interviewer in a way, because I've got to be listening to you and reflecting on what you say and try and come up with something clever to respond. I think what is very important, I think, to look at is there are two ways that we think. We think as individuals, we think on our own, we create ideas on our own, and then we try to convince others that these ideas are worthy. In a group setting, in a meeting, we do have to listen to others. We have to respect their ideas. But at a certain point, doesn't someone have to impose their ideas in a way that might not be immediately accepted?
Yes, yeah. And that is, in what I'm saying, the appropriate way to do that is not to immediately do that after the person has gone quiet, but to basically show and demonstrate to the person that you respect them as a human being by asking questions to make sure you understood what they said before you unload your cannon fire.
I think for those of us that grew up watching American television, I would call that the Colombo method. You know, you've listened, you have your own idea, but you say, let me just ask you one more question.
That's right. But it's that, and the reason for that is we don't want the collaboration to be a competition, me versus you. I want to accept you and your views. We don't have to agree, all right? But we can work on the disagreement. And the rule is that there's got to be data. We can defend our position with data. It's the reason why in a company going forward, when you start looking at culture, an idea of meritocracy is so important. It's not whose idea wins, it's the quality of the idea and basically the data behind the idea, or the agreement on the data that we need to go find. And so, this all comes together into a flow chart, which you will show people at the end. That the beginning is, I got to come to the table with the right mindset, a new smart mindset, a growth mindset, a mindset of impermanence. Everything is constantly changing. Don't be rigid. And the new smart mindset. And then I got to come to the table with the right behaviors. So I'm open-minded, so I can be a good listener, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can basically get to the point of, let's have a high quality, making meaning conversation. Let's make sure we understand each other. Make sure when we walk out of the room, I mean, when I was in the corporate world, a high percentage of the time, we'd walk out of the corporate room, the boardroom or the CEO's office, people would sort of conglomerate, and the first thing you'd hear from people, well, that was interesting. I say, okay, so what do you think? You get words, over my dead body. What do you mean, over my dead body? He says, well, I'm not going to do that. What are you going to do? I'll go back and doing what we're doing. We know what we're doing. He doesn't know what we're doing. All right. I mean, it's like, there's you leave these meetings. It's, you leave those meetings, and if they're really, important meetings or serious meetings, everybody's going back to figuring out, okay, how do I keep at that point, how do I keep the CEO happy and not change? Because what I did, I got to dance with the one that brung me. I'm an EVP or a VP or whatever I am. It must have been working. I can't go change myself this much. And the only way that happens is when the CEO says, and the CEO starts role modeling those behaviors. I mean, a great case study about this on the innovation side is Intuit. Intuit, I wrote a case on Intuit in the first of my trilogy of learning books. It came out in 2014. So Intuit for over a decade has been, and they started at the top with the senior leadership team with the founder, and each got a coach. And they coached themselves for 2 years before they rolled the program out. It took 2 years for them to change their inside way of being. All right.
Are you talking about Scott Cook?
Yes.
Yeah, Scott. Yeah, I knew Scott at business school. We were
Yes.
good friends. Yeah.
Yes, and it's a great story, but it's a story about how they transformed that company. All right, and the way of working. All right. So, what's hyperlearning about? It puts forth, it invites people to consider a new way of being and a new way of working, which come together that will basically take the human component and optimize its effectiveness by focusing on the things the technology cannot do well. That's sort of the story. And the entities that can do that, will have a strategic advantage. And the key is, most of it is how-to skills. Most of it is emotional and behavioral changes. Does that make any sense?
It absolutely does to me. And I think, it goes back to your early comment on emotions and how emotions are, you spend a lot of time in the book talking about emotions, and the kinds of emotion you just described, going out of a meeting and saying, damn it, I wasn't heard, or I didn't agree. Those are the emotions that have to be brought out.
That's right. And what we've got to do is minimize the negative emotions and optimize the positive emotions. And what that means in many companies is humanizing the workplace. All right. I mean, the Industrial Revolution model of command and control doesn't work in the digital age, in the types of thinking that we're talking about. I cannot command and control you, Bill, to be innovative. I mean, I can try, but I can't effectuate it. All right. I can't command and control you to be open-minded or to listen better. All right. I can't command and control you to be, an effective collaborator. All right. So I've got to create the environment. All right. I mean, I I can command and control you to go engage with customers and build an emotional, trusting relationship. And so I can only enable, I can only help you become the person that can basically effectuate that behaviorally. All right. And it goes back to the new way of working, where human dignity is a key part in accepting the fact that we can't control the inner qualities that we need from people to add value in the digital age, which will be different than the value technology can add.
So many of our participants are not CEOs. They're all leaders, however, in their organizations. What would you recommend that they do to try and instill some of these ideas in their organization?
Well, it depends on the organization. I mean, if you've got a CEO that is open-minded and you think this would resonate with, you could have a conversation with the CEO. If you got a CEO that is still old school, command and control, my way or the highway, totally efficiency driven, then you determine, depending on where you are in the structure, do you go to your group head, or are you at the stage where you have a couple of teams that you can basically do your own little program? You can define your own little environment with your people, and you can't dictate it. You can't say, I've decided we're going to do this, this, and this. You have a conversation about how can we be more effective in this basically very changing world. We're not going to go back to the quote normal before COVID. What did we learn from COVID and how we work together? All right, because many people were not physically present. All right, many salespeople were not out there flying all over the world and having fancy dinners in Singapore with people in Japan and Paris.
And what's wrong with that?
But they weren't. All right.
Right.
And organizations have really learned that you can basically emotionally engage with customers virtually. But so what do you control? If you're a manager or a leader, what can you control in your own little environment? And you can have your own little mini experiment. You can basically get with your team and says, let's focus on how we can be very effective so we can really add more value. And let's just say innovation's a big thing right now. How can we become more innovative? All right. What will help us be more innovative? What gets in the way of innovation? And start having those conversations. And you'll quickly get to the point of ego, okay, fear, because ego and fear are the two biggest inhibitors of learning. And all right, so how do we basically do that? And you work with your team, and you go slow, and you bring people into it. And there's plenty of stuff written on this. You give people an article to read, and you have a conversation about the article. And so I think you have to be realistic about what you can accomplish and what you can't accomplish. I can tell you that in organizations where parts of the organization have said, we're going to try this, and they try it and it works, and what you find is other people from the organization coming, what are you doing differently? Your teams are knocking the cover off the ball. What can we do? You can find it can sort of spread. The easy way is when you have a CEO that basically buys into it and make that, but that's in many cases that won't happen. So what can you do in what you control? And what I've learned in doing this is the key thing you need to do is, if you start doing this work, don't go around basically tooting your own horn. All right. Don't go around bragging about how you're doing all of this stuff. Do it with your people, because if you start bragging it and it gets to quote people who view you as competition, what are they going to do? Okay, I'll tell you what they do. They go either talk to the CEO or the CHRO, and they try to get you shut down, And so It's not, it's not a competition. What can I, as a leader, bring to my group to help us be more effective in the digital age? How can I help my people be? And, that's an approach you can take.
No, I'll be the promoter of your book, because some of the things in the book that I found most interesting were the exercises that you suggest, the reflection, the way to think through what you're doing, how you're behaving, and what you might do to improve. And the journey to hyperlearning, the visual that we're going to share with everyone, gives you an idea of what the power of that can be. And I'm really delighted that you were able to join us today, Ed, and it's been a wonderful conversation. I'm still interested in anybody's questions. Raise your hand or say something in the chat. You're not a shy group normally, but we have a few minutes left. Ed, if there's any one last word you'd like to say about your book, I think it is a very dense, it's a very well thought out and an interesting model that a lot of people can benefit from.
And I think I'd leave two further comments, Bill. And I'm speaking to each person individually. Your biggest competition in the digital age will be yourself. And then many of you, I'm sure, are into possibly mind training, meditation, etc. Or some of you are not. I think going forward, we human beings have got to basically take care of our bodies, physical training, but we have to basically do mind training and heart training. And there's practices to do this. And it doesn't take that long every day, but to basically work on, let me bring my best self, not just to my work, to my friends, to my colleagues, to my family, okay? And also to myself. And I think you will find that that journey is a joyous journey, and the ROI on that journey is off the charts. And so I invite you to consider that. And I thank you for your interest in your participation. And I wish everyone a joyous rest of the year and holiday season.
Well, Ed, you've gotten some wonderful comments from the participants. No questions, unfortunately, but some really great comments. And we all want to wish you a happy birthday and hope that you have a wonderful holiday season as well. And now I'm going to pass it back to Dan. We're at the very end of our hour. Dan, anything you'd like to say to wrap this up?